All right, let's begin this dark and twisted tale. Have you ever driven through a place so isolated, so empty, that you felt the world had forgotten it? Somewhere off the main roads, deep in the heart of nowhere, lies a small, crumbling house at the end of a gravel path. No one remembers when it was built or why anyone would choose to live there. But there it stands, a worn relic of the past, with its creaky wooden porch and windows like hollow eyes staring into the void. Inside this house lives a family, a peculiar family, a man, his wife, and their 17-year-old son. They call themselves the Enders. Most people in the nearby towns only know the name by whispers, never spoken above a hush. For those who've crossed their path, or worse, have ventured too close to their home, the Enders are a terrifying enigma. The locals have stories, of course, stories that crawl through the cracks of old bars and hushed gatherings, tales of people who went missing, of strange lights seen at night, and the eerie, bone-chilling screams carried on the wind. I met them once, but before I get to that, let me tell you about what I've learned from others, about what I pieced together from the fragments of dread and suspicion. The man, Elias Ender. Elias is the head of the family, a tall, gaunt figure with sunken eyes that seem to pierce right through you. He has a voice like gravel, rough and unsettling him, as if it hasn't been used for anything other than curses and dark incantations. They say Elias was once a preacher, not of God, but of something much darker, something older. He never set foot in a church, but he knew scripture, or at least twisted versions of it, reciting passages that no Bible contained, invoking names that no one dared to speak aloud. He's often seen at dusk, standing at the edge of their property, staring into the woods with a look that can only be described as hunger. Elias carries an old staff, carved with strange symbols that glow faintly under the moonlight. It's not uncommon to hear strange chants coming from the woods, his voice echoing with a tone that makes your skin crawl, like he's summoning something, speaking to things no one else can see. The wife, Miriam Ender. Miriam, on the other hand, is a different kind of terror. She's a small, almost fragile woman with a face that could be mistaken for kind, if not for her eyes. Her eyes are glassy, as if she's staring into a different world, a different reality, one far darker than ours. Miriam is known for her garden, but it's no ordinary garden. The townsfolk say she grows strange herbs and flowers that give off an unnatural glow, plants that shouldn't survive in the local climate. People swear they've seen her picking these flowers by moonlight, her hands moving delicately, but with a precision that suggests she's performing more than just gardening. There's a rumor about Miriam that chills me to my core every time I think of it. It's said that she can make a tea, a special kind of tea brewed from her garden. People who drink it don't come back the same. They say it twists your mind, makes you forget who you are, where you've been. I heard a story about a young woman, a hitchhiker, who accepted a drink from Miriam. She wandered back into town days later, her eyes empty, her words nonsensical. She never spoke again. The boy, Samuel Ender. Then there's the boy, Samuel. He's about 17, but there's something timeless about him, like he's seen far more than his years should allow. He doesn't go to school and no one sees him in town, but sometimes you'll catch a glimpse of him in the woods, just standing there, watching. Samuel has an unsettling habit of appearing when you least expect it, his pale face emerging from the shadows. The animals in the area are terrified of him. Dogs whimper and hide. Birds fall silent when he passes. There's a story about a local hunter who tried to confront Samuel once, thinking he was just a kid messing around on his land. The hunter came back pale, shaking, refusing to speak of what he saw. Some say the boy spoke to him in a voice that wasn't his own, a voice that sounded like it came from somewhere deep below the earth. The hunter left town the next day and never returned. The rituals. But it's not just the family that terrifies people. It's what they do. It's the rituals. Strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding their home, bone fragments and trinkets hung like warnings. At night, people have seen the glow of fires in the woods, heard the chanting, the rhythmic beating of drums. It's said that Elias leads these rituals with Miriam by his side, her face a mask of ecstasy as they perform unspeakable acts. And the boy, Samuel, stands at the center, his arms outstretched as if offering himself to the dark gods they worship. People have gone missing in the area. Drifters, hikers, even locals who strayed too far after dark. The police don't investigate anymore. They went up there once, years ago. The sheriff at the time, a tough, no-nonsense man, led a team to the Ender house. They were never the same. The sheriff himself resigned soon after, saying he'd seen something that no man should ever see. He refused to speak of it, but I remember the look in his eyes when he came back, pure, unadulterated fear. The night I met them, I was foolish, curious, and perhaps a little reckless. I decided to see it for myself, to drive up that gravel path, past the darkened woods and up to the house. It was late, a foggy night, the kind where the moon is just a pale smudge behind thick clouds. As I approached the house, I felt a chill that wasn't from the cold. It was as if the air itself was warning me to turn back. But I didn't. I knocked on the door, my hand trembling. It opened almost immediately, as if they'd been expecting me. Elias stood there, his hollow eyes boring into mine. He didn't say a word, just stepped aside, inviting me in with a gesture. The inside of the house was worse than I imagined. It was dark, the only light coming from flickering candles scattered around. The walls were covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked disturbingly like blood. Miriam was there too, sitting in a rocking chair, humming a tune that seemed oddly familiar and yet completely foreign. She smiled at me, a smile that was too wide, too knowing. And then there was Samuel, standing in the corner, watching me with those cold, unblinking eyes. He said something to me, a whisper, just a few words, but they're burned into my memory. You've seen too much. Before I could react, the room started to spin. The air grew heavy, filled with the scent of decay and something else, something sweet like the flowers from Miriam's garden. My vision blurred, and the last thing I remember before everything went black was their faces, twisted into expressions of pure malice, and Samuel's hand reaching towards me. The aftermath. I woke up in my car, parked at the edge of the gravel road. It was morning, the sun just beginning to rise. My head was pounding, and my mouth tasted bitter, like I'd swallowed ashes. I drove away as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. For weeks after, I felt like I was being watched. I'd see shadows moving just out of sight, hear whispers in the wind. The nightmares haven't stopped since that night. I still see their faces, hear their voices. And the people who go missing, they haven't stopped either. Sometimes late at night, I think about going back, about confronting them, demanding to know what they did to me. But then I remember the look in Samuel's eyes, the twisted smile on Miriam's lips, and I know I can't. So I'm left with the memories, the nightmares, and the cold, creeping certainty that the Enders are still out there, waiting. They're waiting for the next fool to wander up that path, for the next soul to feed whatever darkness they serve. And all I can do is warn you, keep you from making the same mistake. Because once you meet the Enders, once you look into their hollow eyes, you'll never be the same again. And if you're lucky, you'll live to regret it. But if you're not, well, you'll just be another name added to the growing list of the missing. All right, let's continue the tale of the Enders family. This is where the story delves deeper, revealing the dark truth that lies beneath the surface, the horror that no one dares to speak of. The unraveling. The nightmares kept coming. Every night since my visit to the Enders' house, I would find myself back there in my dreams. I would stand outside, looking at the dilapidated structure. I could hear the whispers, see shadows moving behind the curtains, and then I would hear the voice, Samuel's voice, but it was layered, distorted, as if 1,000 voices were speaking through him. Come back. You belong here. I tried to shake it off as a product of my imagination, my mind playing tricks on me after what I'd seen, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was as if their presence had attached itself to me, a dark tendril wrapping around my soul. I started to notice things changing in my house, small things at first. My lights would flicker, my radio would turn on by itself, playing that same eerie humming tune I had heard Miriam singing. I found small, twisted trinkets on my doorstep. A feather dipped in black tar, a bundle of twigs tied with blood-red string, a doll with its eyes gouged out. And then I started hearing the knocking. It was subtle at first, just a light tap at my window in the middle of the night. But soon it grew louder, more insistent, coming from the front door, then the back, then from all sides of the house at once. One night, it was unbearable. I grabbed a flashlight and stormed outside, ready to confront whoever or whatever was tormenting me. But the night was still, the air heavy with a silence that felt unnatural. And then I saw it. Standing at the edge of my yard, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, was Samuel. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me. I wanted to shout, to demand he leave. But my voice was caught in my throat. And then he smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile, filled with a darkness I couldn't comprehend. He turned and walked into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. The decision I knew I had two choices. I could leave, pack up, and run as far away as possible, or I could go back to that house, confront the Enders, and find out what they wanted from me. I don't know what drove me to choose the latter. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear of running for the rest of my life, or maybe it was something darker, a pull I couldn't resist. I waited until dusk the next day when the fog rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the world in its cold embrace. I drove up that gravel path once more, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I approached the house, I saw them. Elias, Miriam, and Samuel, standing on the porch as if they had been expecting me. "You've returned," Elias said, his voice a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and decay, making it hard to breathe. Miriam stepped forward, her glassy eyes fixed on me. She held out a cup of that infamous tea, her thin lips curling into a smile. "Drink," she whispered. "It will help you see." I hesitated but took the cup. I knew if I wanted answers, I had to play their game. The liquid was thick and dark like ink. I swallowed it in one gulp, shuddering as the bitter, metallic taste coated my tongue. Almost immediately, my vision began to blur. The world around me shifted, the colors bleeding into one another, the house, the porch, the family, everything seemed to warp and twist as if I was seeing it through a veil. The truth revealed. Suddenly, I was no longer on the porch. I was in the woods, deep in the forest that surrounded their house. The trees were taller here, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was cold, and the ground was soft beneath my feet as if I was walking on something that wasn't dirt. I looked down and nearly screamed. The ground was covered in bones, human bones, picked clean, piled high in heaps. The forest floor was a mass grave, a carpet of the dead. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw them, the figures in the shadows. They were people, or at least they had been. Their bodies were gaunt, their skins stretched tight over their bones, their eyes hollow and lifeless. They stared at me with a look of pure, unending torment. "They're the lost," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Samuel standing there, his face emotionless. "They were offered as sacrifices." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "Why do you do this?" Samuel's eyes seemed to darken, and he gestured around us. "This place is a gateway," he said, "a thin spot between our world and the world beyond. My parents, they made a pact long ago with something that lives on the other side. They give it what it wants, and in return it grants us power, longevity, but the price is steep." He stepped closer, and I could see the pain in his eyes, a flicker of something human. "I was born into this," he whispered. "I didn't choose it." Before I could respond, the scene shifted again. I was back in the house, but this time, I was in the basement. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with strange, dark substances. Blood, hair, teeth. In the center of the room was an altar, stained dark with what I could only assume was blood. Elias and Miriam stood on either side, their eyes closed, their lips moving in silent prayer. The air was filled with a low hum, a vibration that seemed to resonate with the very core of my being. And then I saw it. The shadow. It rose from the altar, a dark, shifting mass, its form constantly changing. It had no face, but I could feel its eyes on me, feel its hunger. It was ancient, older than the trees, older than the earth itself. It was the thing they worshipped, the thing they fed with the lives of the missing. "They call it the Harbinger," Samuel's voice said, though he was no longer beside me. "It's a being of pure darkness, an entity that feeds on fear, pain, and death. My parents are its servants. They lure people here, sacrifice them to keep it satisfied, and in return it gives them power, knowledge beyond this world." I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I turned to see Miriam standing there, her smile wide, her eyes filled with madness. You've seen too much, she whispered. You belong to it now. The escape. The next few moments were a blur of terror. I shoved her away and ran, stumbling up the stairs and out of the house. I could hear their laughter behind me, hear the chanting grow louder. The trees seemed to close in around me as I sprinted towards my car. I could feel something chasing me, the cold presence of the harbinger at my back. I barely made it to my car, slamming the door shut and speeding away down the gravel road. The fog was thicker now, swirling with shadows that reached out towards me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew if I did, I'd see it standing there, watching me leave. The aftermath. It's been months since that night. I left town, moved far away, but the nightmares haven't stopped. I still see their faces, hear their voices. I can still feel the cold grip of the harbinger's presence. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear the knocking at my window again. And every time I'm terrified to look, because I know that someday I won't wake up in my bed. I'll wake up back in that forest, standing among the bones of the dead, with Samuel watching me, his cold, empty eyes filled with pity. And I'll know that it's my turn to be the sacrifice.